Alrighty, everyone. I think that'll do us. We'll get going. Afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you very much for dialing in, and welcome to this afternoon's Pride and Property session with Mermaids. My name is Julian Phatarfod. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a principal transport planner at WSP UK and co-chair of our LGBT+ network Vibe, but I'm also a national committee member of Building Equality, which is an alliance of organisations within the construction and built environment industry. Today marks about the halfway point in our Pride and Property fortnight. Some of you may have attended one of the many events throughout this week so far, but for the new faces out there, Pride and Property is a collaboration between the cross-industry LGBT+ networks, changing the face of property, freehold, planning out, and building equality, covering the breadth of organizations that are engaged in designing and developing the built environment around us. This week, we have heard from a number of professionals in our sector about what our industry faces with regards to LGBT+ inclusion in our workplaces, but we are also working together with 3 charity partners to raise the profile of the work they do for the LGBT+ community. We are very aware that many charities have lost funding and campaign opportunities due to the cancellation of all the physical Pride events throughout the country this year. So as part of our virtual Pride and Property fortnight, we have therefore chosen to support the Proud Trust, Mind Out, and Mermaids. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from Matt Moore from Mermaids, the UK charity and advocacy organisation that supports gender diverse and transgender youth. And before I hand over to Matt, I would like to show you a quick video to introduce them.
My name is Susie Green and I am the CEO of Mermaids. Mermaids is a UK-based charity. We've been running for 25 years and we support trans and gender diverse children, young people and their families. We offer a range of services. We have a helpline, email and web chat service that runs 9 AM till 9 PM, Monday to Friday. We also offer training into organisations across the country. We have a legal advocacy service. We also have a service for online groups. So we have a parents group and we also have an online youth group. Those are opportunities for people to talk to one another, to share their stories and to gain peer support from one another. We hold events across the country for families, young people to attend, and we particularly want to engage with the young people themselves in those circumstances.
Hi, I'm Jay and this is my video.
Hi, my name's Sabrina.
Hello, my name is Emily.
Hi, I'm Tobias.
As far as Mermaids is concerned, what we want to see is a better life and less prejudice and discrimination towards trans children and their families. And so that's the basis of the work that we do. I'd like to say hi to everybody out there. Thank you so much for your support and stay safe. Thank you.
Obviously, I'm going to be that person that starts talking when they're on mute because that always happens. And with that, I will now hand over to Matt Moore. Please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A function on your screens, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Julian. Can you see my screen okay?
All good.
And is that still okay?
Yeah, fantastic.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Matt Moore. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm Corporate Fundraising Manager for Mermaids. I've been with the charity just under a year. I am not trans myself. I am a cisgender gay man and a staunch ally of trans people. Before Mermaids, I worked at Stonewall for 3 years, doing LGBT inclusion work as well as corporate partnerships. So I'm quite familiar with your sector and the kind of massive headway that you're making in terms of LGBT+ inclusion. And I'm really privileged to be here today alongside your other charity partners. And thank you so much for choosing to support us. I'm going to give you a quick kind of overview of Mermaids, some kind of Trans 101, and a look at the kind of current state of play, how we've dealt with COVID-19 and lockdown, and some of the kind of hot topics that are going around at the moment, which you may or may not have seen in the media. And yeah, there'll be some time at the end for some Q&A. Don't be shy, this is a safe space. Happy to answer any of your questions. Let's get going. Mermaids was founded in 1995. This is our 25th anniversary this year. And we've also always held these key values. We embrace, we empower, and we educate. So we embrace our service users who come to us as they're usually facing challenging situations and they shouldn't have to be alone. And we bring them into our communities that we've built. We want our young people and families to be empowered to be themselves, find the support they need and thrive. And ultimately we want to change the world. And at the end of the day, Mermaids, we do not want to exist. We want every young trans person or gender questioning person to be accepted. In the meantime, we haven't reached that day yet. We're here to educate. So we support professionals, parents and young people with the information they need. And as you can imagine, these values are very closely interlinked. So we educate to help empower people and we embrace them rather than making judgments. And we're there for any young person that approaches us or comes to us, or any parent. Some will be trans, the majority are, but some will be questioning. So we support any journey that they go on, whether they transition or not, and we respect that every trans experience is different. I'm going to go into detail a bit more about our services. Susie kindly gave an overview in that video, but just in a bit more detail. So the heartbeat of the charity, and has been for many years, is our helpline and web chat. So in the last financial year, we answered over 11,000 points of contact across our phone, web chat and email services. So our helpline is our phone line, as Susie said, open 9 AM to 9 PM, Monday to Friday. We have a small team supporting that, as well as a group of amazing volunteers who give up their time every week to help answer calls and ensure that there's someone at the end of that phone line whenever someone calls. Our web chat service was brought into action about 3 years ago, based on the feedback that our young people didn't want to speak to old people. Just so you know what an old person is, that's anyone over the age of 30, so myself included. So that is accessible via our website, and you can do that across devices as well. And I'll speak of it later, but as you can imagine, during lockdown, that has become incredibly vital part of our service, as some people who might not be out or less confident can reach out to us in a private fashion from a device rather than kind of picking up the phone. We have an information support service as well. So if you email info@mermaidsuk.org.uk, someone will pick that up, provide you with information or support should you need it. The helpline is also kind of our gateway to our forums. So we have two forums, one for parents, which has over 1,800 members at the moment, and our young persons forum, which has over 700 young people. These are fully secure and moderated to ensure that kind of conversation is kept safe, any safeguarding issues are identified, and the misinformation isn't spread. So we vet every single person that wants to access those to ensure that people are being kept safe and the right type of people are using those forums. They're primarily for peer support, information sharing, and ensuring that people can talk about their experiences. A lot of transgender young people might not know anyone else like themselves. So these communities that we built are really vital to ensuring that people can be themselves and explore their identity. We'd usually be attending events nationwide this time of year, especially during Pride. But yeah, we have a presence across the country. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, that's been restricted. And we also, unfortunately, have had to cancel the next few, but we run residential weekends for the whole family. So this is from Friday afternoon to Sunday. We usually run 4 a year. And we run a series of activities, workshops, fun activities for the kids, workshops for the parents. And they're just, I managed to get to one towards the end of last year. It's just amazing to see all these young people who have probably been quite isolated or are not very confident, or some of them probably haven't left their room in months, really come out of their shells because they've kind of found community and found people like themselves. And yeah, it's a shame that we've had to pull them, because some of these, our families look forward to them all year and they're totally oversubscribed. But we'll hopefully be bringing them back as soon as we can. But the safety of our service users has to come first. We also run support groups nationwide. So these are volunteer-led groups supported by us, and they meet usually on a monthly basis. We have them across most major cities. I think we have about 12 at the moment, but we have ambitions to grow that to 45 in the next 5 years, so that anyone, anywhere in the country, should they need that in-person support, can find it in their local area. Some of the groups are quite massive. Actually, I think our Leeds one has over 50 people. And this is there's only so much you can do over the phone or through a screen. So it's for these families to get together, again, share experiences, find peer support, and help their young people be themselves. We also have a full-time legal caseworker who deals with any inquiries of a legal nature. So this could be about name changing. It could be a school who is not fulfilling their equality duty. And we support those people to ensure that they know the law, and that if a young person is being treated unfairly, that they can address that in a meaningful way. Not all cases will require kind of legal intervention, most of them don't. We also signpost to law firms should they need it, and we're building a network of trans-inclusive firms across the country. And we're quite unique in that I think we're the only LGBT plus charity in the UK that has a full-time legal position or legal department. We also undertake campaigning, research and advocacy. So we liaise with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Government Equalities Office, Department for Education and others to help identify and combat poor practice, but also to ensure that the young people that we support, their voices are heard and that they are brought to the top. We've been supporting them for 25 years. We know what's actually going on, so we want to ensure that government departments and officials are listening to them. And finally, we have a training team that delivers training into schools, social services, and many other agencies supporting trans children, young people and their families. And we can also support private organisations as well. I'm just going to quickly do a bit on language. There might be terms you're unfamiliar with, that you might be kind of experts, but language changes so often. So I thought it'd be quite good to, should later on in the presentation I'll be throwing around words you're not very familiar with, cover those off right now. So when I say trans or transgender, this is when a young person, when a person, not a young person, any person, when a person's gender identity doesn't match their gender assigned at birth, which is how other people have perceived them. So myself included, everyone else, when you're born, you're usually, they'll tick a box, usually with an M or an F next to it, based on your physical characteristics. So for most people, this is fine. I'm male, I identify as a man. However, for some, an estimated 1% of the population, their innate sense of gender is different to what they were assigned at birth. And that ultimately is what it means to be trans. It's an umbrella term. It can cover a lot of different identities, including non-binary, genderqueer, and to be honest, it's not a restrictive definition, and changes very often and can mean a lot of things to different people. The opposite of that is cisgender. So I'm cis, I'm a cis man. So this is when a person's gender identity does match their assignment at birth. And for the vast majority of people, they are cis. Non-binary is when someone does not identify as one of the binary genders, for example, male or female. And this doesn't mean they're in the middle of something. It's actually a spectrum. So if you think of gender, it could be a light switch. So you're either male or female, one or the other. It's better to think of it more as a spectrum. So more of a dimmer switch. You can be, well, I'm not a non-binary person myself, but some describe it as one day they will feel more masculine, another day they might feel more feminine. For others, it could mean a complete absence of gender. So that is agender. Non-binary is not, again, kind of a simple definition. It means a lot to a lot of different people. It can mean wanting to dress a certain way on one day and dress a different way on another. And it can mean having medical interventions, but it can also mean it's just about how you present your gender or how people think of you. Just because someone is non-binary, it doesn't mean they have to be androgynous. It doesn't mean they have to prescribe to kind of a certain picture. I think some of my colleagues get quite annoyed because whenever they see like a media representation of a non-binary person, it's usually a androgynous white person who kind of sits between the two genders, but that is definitely not what it is. It is a wide spectrum of identities and generally sits outside those kind of male or female binaries. And finally, gender, which is in itself a very complex term, but we consider it an umbrella term for all the different aspects and concepts used to identify and separate men, women, and non-binary people. And it may include your body parts, so your biological sex, your gendered expression, so how masculine or feminine you present yourself, and gender identity, so how someone perceives their own gender. And just to address the difference between gender and sexuality, it's important to know that they are distinct, but also very much interlinked, because they're regularly conflated. I think because we say LGBT+, you can assume that the T is part of the LGB, but they are very distinct, and you can be trans and straight, you can be trans and lesbian, gay or bi, you can be non-binary and any sexual orientation that you feel. And your gender identity does not necessarily dictate your sexual orientation. And a lot of younger people these days, actually not younger as well, I've seen a lot of kind of adults use this term as well, but a lot of people are moving away from strict labels around gender and sexuality and moving to queer. And we're also seeing a rise in fluidity when defining oneself in these terms. So although they are distinct, they're also interlinked. So you can, often people will assume a sexuality based on someone's gender. So if you see a camp flamboyant man, they might assume they are gay. And similarly with kind of butch lesbians, there's sometimes that conflation. And ultimately, well, personally, I think a lot of transphobia and homophobia and biphobia is rooted in this kind of assumption on what you should be based on your gender or your sexuality. And at the end of the day, gendered stereotypes don't really help anyone, and especially trans people. So why might someone be trans? Well, we don't actually know, and you could say the same about why might someone be cis. But there are different schools of thought, which are outlined on this slide. It could be biological, so research into brain functions indicates that there is a link, but this is limited. And there's also research around kind of brain structures. Could it be social or cultural? We've seen a rise in visibility of gender variance, meaning that a lot of people are self-determining their gender a lot earlier. And Mermaids, one of the reasons we kind of had to grow as a charity and really formalize our work is because of the massive increase we were seeing in young people coming to us saying they were trans. And as you can see, there was that kind of trans tipping point earlier in the decade, saying the very famous Time cover with Laverne Cox. That sort of rise in visibility has allowed people to socially accept that their gender identity might not be what they were assigned at birth. So that's a theory around why we're seeing this increase and why a lot of younger people are transitioning earlier. And it could be psychological, but it's important to note that the World Health Organization does not consider gender dysphoria as a mental health condition. Being trans is not in any way a mental illness or mental issue. It's completely natural and has been observed in cultures throughout history. It's just now, because I think embedded kind of transphobia for so many years, that people are kind of seeing it as this new thing. But if you look back into the history, which we do in our full training, but I don't have enough time at this moment, trans identities have been there since the dawn of time, and they're not going to go away. But there is this focus now because, especially in this country, their rights are under continual discussion, and we're seeing a massive increase in kind of media attention around transgender people. So, apologies, my Bose is going off. I'm going to turn that off. I think it's going to stop. Sorry about that. Had to be a moment. My apologies. So what are the daily challenges that some of our young people face? And I don't want to, again, I say we don't want to be here as a charity, but I think it's important to recognize the issues that our young people are facing day in, day out. And we do, from the experience of our helpline and my colleagues, these are actual daily occurrences. So a young trans person can face multiple challenges in being themselves. And it can lead to isolation because they are either not accepted or they don't feel comfortable enough to be out or disclose their gender identity to anyone. And they'll struggle to find someone to talk to. Discrimination and prejudice. We have, as my colleague who works in the legal field says, daily discrimination from people such as teachers, who are not allowing, say, a young trans person to use the facilities that align with their gender identity and they're comfortable using. And this can lead to things like young trans people not eating for the whole day because they do not want to have to use the toilet, or even wetting themselves at school. And unfortunately, these are things that are still going on. Bullying, such could be either physical or mental, and this can come from peers, adults, authority figures, or parents and family. And finally, parents, carers, and siblings can also suffer prejudice. And usually I've heard a lot of young people are being discriminated against, usually because of the views that their parents are holding rather than the kids themselves, which just goes to show that prejudice and discrimination is mostly learned rather than innate. And covering these challenges, I also want to reiterate that it's not all bad. We support many young people who are accepted and thriving. During lockdown, I heard a lovely story from one of our helpline operators who had received a phone call from a young person who wanted help coming out to their family, and they called back I think about a week later and just kind of said, thank you so much, I used your advice, I spoke to my family, and they've fully accepted me. So we do tend to focus so much on the negative, but there are a lot of young people out there who are being supported, thriving, and we just have to kind of change that world around them to ensure that they can grow up and be themselves. As is the topic du jour, I'm going to quickly talk through some of the challenges that have arisen from lockdown. So waiting times for trans people, young trans people, are already significant and are on average more than 2 years. I think at the moment it's 27 months. And COVID-19 is leading to further delays in consultation and treatments. And sometimes the providers are providing very uncertain information. So as you can imagine, if you're a young trans person, you come out at, say, 10 or 11, waiting 2 years, you might end up starting puberty, your body will start changing, not having access to interventions such as hormone blockers, which can pause these changes, they don't necessarily stop them. That can be extremely mentally distressing for a young trans person. So these further delays, we've seen a lot of kind of confusion and concern in our community because they're not certain when they might be seen, and that kind of first consultation might be getting ever more distant in the future. We're also seeing administration of hormone blockers and hormone replacement therapy being considered non-essential healthcare. At Mermaids, we would like to see this as essential healthcare. And again, people who are denied these prescriptions might be feeling that they are detransitioning or reversing their kind of transition. We've also seen increased feeling of isolation due to being separated from friends. So for some young people, they might only be able to be themselves at school. They might have an unsupported family, but the school is supporting them. So being locked up with family can be incredibly distressing because they can't be themselves. And finally, we quite devastatingly have seen unsupported family members use this time to roll back the support that they had for their child by kind of trying to convince them that they are not transgender, reverting back to birth names, changing back pronouns. And as you imagine, our helpline service has been even more vital during this time. So what have we done to alleviate this? So we quickly recognized that our helpline was going to be even in more demand. So we increased capacity, especially across web chat. And we saw an increase in daily repeat visitors to the web chat service. I think we're seeing about 600 a month at the moment. And we've also seen a huge increase in repeat visitors. So people who are kind of just wanting to talk about their day. And we asked all our operators to ensure during this period, and from now on actually, that every single caller or every single web chat, that we ask their name and pronouns up front, so that we ensure that they're just being recognized and their identity is valid, and that they can recognize that on the call, because that might be the only part of that day when they are actually feeling themselves when they are speaking to us. As a result, we've increased visibility and signposting to resources to help young people manage stress and anxiety, and directing to online counselling organisations such as COOF. And as lockdown happened, we had to take stock and realise that all our events were going to be cancelled, and that for a lot of young people, they were going to lose out on kind of things they were looking forward to for months. So we quickly moved our efforts online into digitizing how we support people, and really saw our outgoing comms and our comms team and our social media and our website as kind of the most essential, well, one of the most essential parts of our charity, and pretty much a core service. So we broadened our digital offering, and I think it was in 2 weeks of lockdown, we pulled together a festival called DigiFest, because we wanted to show all these young trans people and their families that there was support out there, that we were there for them. This was not going to go away. So we ran an event called DigiFest on Twitch for 12 hours. I think it actually ended up being 13 hours. It was a fundraiser, but it was also an opportunity for supporters of young trans people to come together. We had celebrity guests, including Lorraine Kelly, Davina De Campo, Dr. James the Vet, Jake Graff. All of our patrons came along, and we announced Munro Bergdorf as a new patron of the charity. And I think we raised about £14,000 for Mermaids, because at that time we were like, we have no idea how our income is going to be affected. After that, we started running some private streams for online group members, because we wanted to not necessarily have to have a public forum where people could ask kind of more personal questions, more sensitive questions. We ran a few of those, but we've now moved back to online events. And if you follow our Instagram, we're now running regular kind of get-togethers with our celebrity supporters. So we've had one with Ollie Pike this week, the author, LGBT author, drag queen Cheryl Hole. And yeah, so keep an eye on that. I think they're archived also on our Instagram, so you can watch them, chat to my lovely colleagues. And then finally, as I mentioned before, it'll be important to look at kind of the current outlook, which it's been a very interesting few weeks for Mermaids. So you might have seen there's been quite a lot of noise around J.K. Rowling, because she thought that during a pandemic and global protests against racial injustice was a perfect time to mention to the world that she didn't really believe trans people deserved to be treated equally in society. So obviously this was hugely upsetting to our trans and LGBT plus supporters of the author. My colleague Jake, who runs our social media, he is a huge Harry Potter fan, and Slytherin, although I kind of quit the books around book 4, so I don't really know too much anymore. But yeah, she had been making comments online that were suggestive of kind of not supporting trans women in particular. And as you can see on the screen, she posted this tweet around an article that was calling people who menstruate instead of bundling everyone together as women. And she followed that up with a very long blog post, which contained and was very well written, but a lot of kind of rhetoric that suggested that trans people were a threat to women and girls, that they don't belong in certain spaces. So we wrote an open letter in response to J.K. Rowling, which you can read on our website. It is not as equally long, but it is rather long, but we really wanted to address a lot of the misinformation that she presented as someone with such a huge platform. And following that, not very long after that, we also saw this headline you can see from the Sunday Times. And there was a leak from the government that suggested that the Gender Recognition Act reform was going to be shelved. This is from 2018. The reform to the Gender Recognition Act basically was to allow trans people to change their gender on their birth certificate, nothing else, but wanted to demedicalize and make it a lot less of a kind of, some people consider a very humiliating process. They have to prove their gender. So this consultation happened in 2018. From reports, over 70% of people were supportive of reform to the Act. However, this leak suggested that these reforms were going to be shelved after over 2 years of waiting, but it also mentioned some worrying concepts around moves to protect single-sex spaces, which actually suggested a rollback for trans rights that were completely unrelated to the Gender Recognition Act and actually enshrined in the Equality Act 2010. So we've been campaigning since actually before this, to ask people to write to their MP, write to the Prime Minister, and voice their concerns over this, say that they support trans people and there is no kind of inherent risk, and that to actually pull something, I mean, my personal opinion is to pull reform of an act that was so heavily consulted on is actually undemocratic. And we only have to look at North Carolina, where they implemented the bathroom bill, which actually saw a rise in transphobic incidents against women and trans people, and was found to be completely unworkable. There is research to show that kind of self-determination for trans people is not a risk to people. If you look to Ireland, to Malta, this is all kind of, yeah, so we need people to stand behind and write to their MP, write to number 10, and get behind us in opposing these moves. We haven't actually heard from the government yet what the specific actions will be, but we're expecting to hear them before summer recess. So time is very short, but we have lots of resources online should you be interested in taking any of these actions. So thank you so much for having me, and apologies for the little blip in the middle there. And yeah, I'm here for any questions you may have. I will now stop the broadcast, I think. There you go.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Matt. That was fantastic. I've found that Venn diagram of biological, social, and psychological really interesting. I never really think of that. It was something I hadn't seen before. You had mentioned the open letter to J.K. Rowling. Where's my chat function gone? I've got the link. I was just going to pop it in for people to read. I read it when it was released. Where's it gone? There it is. Wonderful.
It's on
I
our
hope everyone can
homepage.
see that. Oh, it's on the homepage, but yeah, making it easy for everybody. It's highly informative, so anyone who hasn't read it, please do. But we now have some time for some questions. So please do ask away. We already have one from an anonymous attendee.
I see one's coming.
Which is, what's the best way to support someone who comes out as trans or non-binary?
I would say the best way to support them is to listen to them and to unequivocally kind of support them in their experience, because coming out as a first stage, I think for anyone who is kind of gay, bi, or lesbian, like, coming out is scary, and the experiences, I think, for trans people are even more scary, because it's, I mean, LGBT identities are more accepted than they were, say, 20 years ago, but I think we're in a stage now where trans people are kind of really worried about another kind of Section 28 against their identity. So I think believing them and accepting them is the first stage. I mean, it will have taken a lot of kind of courage to reach that stage. A lot of trans people know that they are trans from a very young age. A lot of research has shown that there's usually huge gaps between knowing that you're trans and actually coming out as trans. So the best way to be a trans ally is to listen, I think, and respect people's experiences. And you might not be able to understand them, because, I mean, myself as a cis person, I can't imagine looking in the mirror and thinking, this is not me, and wanting to change that. It's actually out of my comprehension. But there are a lot of trans people. There are many trans people out there. Like, they exist. So I think just listening and accepting them is the best thing you can do, and supporting them in their decisions. And yeah, I'll leave it at that before I start rambling.
Fantastic, Matt. We had a question come in from Mimi Banks saying, have you had any response from J.K. Rowling? Have you said anything directly to Mermaids, I presume, Mimi, or in general?
No, is the short answer. No, we've not had any direct response, as far as I know, publicly, and I don't think in any way. I
mean, she's been tweeting, hasn't she? Various other things, but maybe not in
yes.
direct response.
I don't think we have shifted her opinion in any huge way. Though our patron Monroe wrote a letter to Baroness Nicholson, who has also been making certain claims and actually directly kind of attacked Mermaids. That was actually published in the Evening Standard yesterday. It was a very well written letter in response to kind of this quite damaging rhetoric around trans people and kids.
I'm gonna.
But I'm sure as soon as we do have a response, we will respond ourselves. But yeah, we have not had anything so far.
Yeah, we'll keep our eyes and ears peeled. We've had another question come through from Danny. What would you say is the best way to approach those, either online or face-to-face, who are saying disrespectful things? People tend to shut down at this, and I'm trying to find out if there are any approaches that work best. Also, actually, well, Danny's also added to this. Also, sorry, I have a lot of thoughts. Thanks, Danny. How would you approach cancel culture, especially in relation to the JK situation? I think that goes hand in hand with the approach to people who will be saying disrespectful things as well, and balancing that.
So on the first one, I think sometimes it can be. I think sometimes people can be very entrenched in their views, and I think it's about knowing if there is kind of a level of ignorance or a level of hostility to their viewpoints. So, I mean, from my experience in the sector, in charity and stuff, with this issue is like, don't feed the trolls. I think if there's an issue, if there is a hateful comment that comes up, especially with this issue, like some people may be so entrenched that you're probably going to end up wasting your time trying to convince them. But in other instances, if there is a level of ignorance, I would just try and educate them. Is it actually rooted in transphobia, or is it rooted in ignorance? And we do live in a transphobic society just as much as we live in a racist society. A lot of these things are learned. I would say share resources. I'm going to watch it tonight, but there has just been a documentary put on Netflix called Disclosure, and it's about, I think, 100 years history of trans people in the media. I've heard it's incredible. Again, I'm here saying I've heard, but I've only heard very, very good things. So pieces like that, I think, for me, I joined Stonewall 4 years ago thinking I was a staunch trans ally, but I actually realized quite quickly that I had no idea really about non-binary identities. So I took that upon myself to say I need to educate myself, because I very kind of made a very snap judgment on someone who presented in quite a binary gendered way but identifies as non-binary, and I was like, that doesn't happen, that doesn't exist, like they need to look this up. And then I realized that was my ignorance coming through. So I think ultimately education, there's so much out there, there's YouTube channels, there's podcasts, there's everything. I think try and don't get het up in the situation, I think, but also find that root and say, is this person coming from a place of ignorance, or are they actively hostile? And I'd say with the more hostile ones, pick your battles, because obviously you need to, and in every occasion, only do things if it's safe to do so. Do not put yourself at risk, or in a situation where you might be unsafe. And to follow up with cancel culture, I really but I really respect Monroe Bergdorf, who is a patron of Mermaids in this respect. She is very anti-cancel culture. She would rather, and you might have seen with L'Oreal, who came under fire because of their reaction to Black Lives Matter, when she was fired because of her how she was outspoken on structural racism 3 years ago. They've now kind of met, and she is going to be advising them on diversity issues. They're also making a donation to Mermaids. But she's very much like, I don't think, well, personally, I don't think cancel culture is beneficial, because it kind of nullifies conversations. It leaves people out of conversations. So I think with J.K. Rowling, I think this is maybe a very long journey, and read our open letter and see where we come from that perspective, because I think a lot of misinformation gets thrown around, and that letter is to kind of reset that narrative. But yeah, I don't like cancelling people. I don't do it myself. Not that I have much influence. But yeah.
We've got I'm going to combine two questions here. One of which is, how can our organizations help progress trans and non-binary rights? But there's a meatier version from Kate. Working in housing, young trans and LGBT teens are our customers of tomorrow. What kind of training is offered currently to be able to support them now to live without fear and independently? One, is it effective? And two, do you find a difference between location, between urban and rural? Which is meaty. Which I'm sorry to the anonymous attendee that I've kind of combined our organizations into this in terms of property and real estate and how that all fits in.
For organizations, I think it starts at kind of policy level, but also consulting with trans people, whether they are your staff or not. I think ultimately you're only going to have the most robust policies, training, communications, everything, unless you speak to trans non-binary people. But then again, it's not kind of the responsibility of the trans person who works there to advise on this. If you don't have the internal resource, look outside. Organizations such as ourselves, we can advise on policy, so can Stonewall. And there is a lot of stuff, a lot of material out there, but I think ultimately, unless you have a trans or non-binary person, or a trans non-binary person, looking at a certain policy or someone with the lived experience, you're not going to get an authentic viewpoint. So I would definitely I wouldn't be comfortable saying this policy is fit for purpose because I have experience in reading trans inclusion policies. So I think it has to come from inside, but if that's not possible, an outside viewpoint as well. When it comes to what kind of training is offered currently to support them from now to live without fear independently, is that training within the sector, or do you think it's all for? So there are organizations such as Global Butterflies. Mermaids, we provide training as well, so feel free to reach out to myself. We can look at how we can run our training or adapt our training to be relevant for your organization. Julian, I'm happy for you to share my email address. In terms of effectiveness and difference between location, I don't think I'm confident enough to answer that. Our training has very positive feedback. Yeah, we do see major differences between kind of rural and urban communities. But yeah, I don't have the data to effectively kind of answer that. I'm sorry.
No, it's tough. I was trying to think of exactly how we'd be able to. Yeah, I mean, it is a problem. It's exactly what I mean. It's so well phrased, Kate. They are the customers of tomorrow. We need to make sure.
Yeah, and I think this really reflects on thinking about the future, the longevity of any business, is that gender diversity and perceptions of gender and how we talk about gender for younger people is so much different to kind of my generation. I'm in my early 30s, but I think things are changing so fast. So I think to ensure that you are kind of open to the next generation, or gender diverse people, or people who think about gender differently, they're not going to stand for uninclusive cultures anymore. And the more steps you can be taking now to ensure that trans people are welcome within your organization, the better adapted you're going to be for change.
Yeah, that's very well said, actually. Much easier said than done in terms of how that translates into practice.
But this work takes time.
That's the job of all these cross-industry networks, is to try and figure out the best way to do that. Danny's also mentioned that they've got some ideas to share and discuss. I think that around helping people communicate, I don't know if that's...
I'm happy to start a conversation. My job role is corporate fundraising, but I'm also kind of corporate engagement for the charity. So I do discuss with a lot of organizations and corporates and third sector. So yeah, if you wanna share ideas, I'm open for, please do get in contact.
Nice. Great, thanks. Do we have any other questions from the floor? I quite like KC's comment in the chat function. Lisa Power was saying that we need to humanize trans and non-binary people as the media so often demonizes them. It's like LGBT 20 years ago. Once you've met a gay person, you realize they're like you and me. And it's very true. It's that visibility, pure visibility does a whole lot. People standing up and just being visible, exactly how you said with Monroe Bergdorf on the front cover. It's that oh, I can see that is something that I can now. It's attainable. It's a role model. It's that all that idea of visibility is something that in a positive light and not demonized is just so powerful in its own right.
Yeah, I think I read a statistic recently that I think 80% of people don't personally know a trans person. So, and that's just how it is because it is a minority within a minority within LGBT. So I think that puts it on, well, I can't remember where I read this again, but as with racism, like it's not the issue of the black person or the person of color to address racism. It's on the racists themselves. And with transphobia, again, it's not the trans person's responsibility to change the world and fix transphobia. It's up to us as allies and cis people. So I think that education piece is just always, that's what I always go back to personally is how can I better understand. There's some amazing books and resources out there. My big pile of reading materials, which is now growing ever bigger with recent events. So yeah, I always go back to education.
No, indeed.
Exactly. They probably do know trans people and they just don't know, which is very true.
That I forget who actually mentioned it, but maybe I think it was you, Danny, about knowing that line or what we were mentioning in between. Who can we educate, and when we see views that can we put the effort in and will this work, or are they a lost cause and we pick the battles, and like when is someone cancelled, or when do you engage, when can you see? I think over time, I think I asked Ollie Pike this once, and it was over time you get used to knowing when someone could come around or could be educated or would be a valuable discussion, or you might as well just not put the energy in because it's just gonna be fruitless. And over time you get better at assessing figuring out exactly when that applies and when that doesn't. But exactly what Daddy saying, fine line is so difficult, and yeah, I'm not there yet. I go down really seething arguments and I lose 2 hours on Twitter and I'm like, oh, there that goes. No.
Unfortunately, I think I am in the ultimate kind of echo chamber bubble sort of person, which I'm very bad at Twitter anyway. I don't really respond to anyone. I just retweet things. Maybe that's just cowardice for me. But yeah, I find it quite mentally draining sometimes. But yeah, finding the line is difficult. I think self-care is also very important. Just ensure that look after yourself and don't kind of put yourselves in precarious situations.
Indeed. Well, on that note, if there aren't any more questions coming through, I just wanted to say that as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we are very aware that many charities will have lost funding and the campaigning opportunities with due to lockdown and distancing arrangements, and the cancellation of many of the physical prides. So we would appreciate if you'd be able to support our charity partners, including Mermaids. We will be circulating a link later today in an email, but I'm also going to pop the sponsor me page. Oh, there you go, Kelly, right on top of things. I love having back support. But yeah, so please do visit the link and help the incredible work that Mermaids does. I think we'll probably have time for one last question or two if anyone wants to get in, but I know some might not be typing away. If not, I think that does bring us to a natural close of the afternoon. I'd like to express a big thank you to Matt. Thank you very much for your informative session. And yes, please do support mermaids in the work that they do. Mermaids.
Mermaids.
We want more mermaids. But yes, thank you very, very much, and to everyone, have a great afternoon and a lovely weekend.
Thanks
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great weekend.